What's the creepiest memory you have from your childhood that still give you the chills? My brother and I were kids, probably around 10 and 11. We went to stay at my aunt's house for a few nights during the summer to visit our cousins. My aunt had a converted garage that she used as an at-home daycare. The door that connected the garage to the house was one of those daycare-style doors where the top half can open while the bottom half stays closed. On the other side of that door was their kitchen. The first night there, my brother, my cousin, and I made pallets on the floor in the garage to sleep. I remember the room being dark, but the top half of the door was open and you could see the glow from the microwave light in the kitchen. I was rolled over facing the other way, trying to fall asleep, but my brother and cousin kept horsing around, giggling and saying, "Hey, hello, hello, mom, aunt, stop freaking us out." Finally, I turned around to see what was going on, and I could clearly see the outline of a person standing in the doorway. It looked like their elbow was resting on the top half of the door, with their chin propped in their hand. It looked like they were just standing there watching us. The figure stood out clearly because the glow from the microwave light was illuminating them from behind. The boys kept calling out, saying, "This isn't funny." Eventually, the shadow just got up, turned around, and walked away. We all looked at each other like, what on earth was that? We got out of bed, went through the door, into the kitchen, and then to the living room, where my aunt usually slept. She had sleep apnea and always slept in a recliner with her CPAP mask on her face. We woke her up and said, "What the heck, were you just watching us?" She said no, she had been asleep the whole time. The four of us were the only ones in the house. Then she asked if the shadow looked like it could have been a man. And when we said yes, she told us that sometimes when she woke up in the middle of the night, she would see a man standing in the hallway from her recliner, and that it must have been him watching us. We saw a ghost. Story 2. Late winter of 1998. I was 12 years old at a sleepover. We had just finished watching our blockbuster rental, Boogie Nights, since the parents weren't home yet. Afterward, we went to the kitchen, snacked, and talked about all the weird stuff we had just seen for the first time. LOL. The parents eventually got home. A few of the girls lived on the same street, so they went back to their houses. Then we headed to bed. I was in the middle child's room, which she shared with her younger sister. I slept in her bed. It was 2 twin beds pushed up against the wall with a toy chest in between, up by the headboards. Her mother came in and told us goodnight. I lay there for a few minutes with my eyes closed. All of a sudden, I heard a girl's voice say, "It's cold in here." I looked up and saw my friend standing at the foot of the beds. I told her, "So get a blanket," then rolled over and closed my eyes again. Then I heard her again. "I'm so cold." I sat up to help her. By then, my eyes had adjusted to the dark, and the streetlight was shining faintly through the curtains. That's when I saw her. A girl about our age, wearing a knee-length nightgown. She had long, dark hair. She was holding a teddy bear, and she was soaking wet. Her eyes looked completely dark. Suddenly, it was like she glitched. One moment, she was at the foot of the bed, and the next, she was right beside me at my knees. It wasn't my friend. I jumped out of the bed, screaming, and leapt into the other bed with my friend. I kept pointing and yelling, Look at the girl. Who is she?" Her mom came running in. As soon as she turned on the light, the girl was gone. My friend never saw her, only I did. Her mom eventually calmed me down, and somehow I managed to fall asleep. I never saw her again, but fast forward to Thanksgiving of 2013. We had grown up together, and our families were very close. We were all at the table, laughing and drinking wine. Someone made a joke about that night, and that's when her mother finally told us something she had kept to herself all those years. The day after we all left, she went into the room to tidy up, and the spot on the carpet where I said I had seen the girl was soaking wet. They only lived in that house for about a year, because it was a temporary rental while their new home was being built. They said nothing else ever happened while they lived there, but the neighbors apparently told stories all the time. When they were moving out, the elderly neighbor next door came over to say goodbye and wish them well. They got to talking, and the neighbor told her that back in the 1970s, a young girl who lived in that house had sleepwalked into the duck pond at the end of the cul-de-sac and drowned in the middle of winter. Story 3. I was about 7, and to this day, I still don't know if what I saw was a real person or not. My mom was, and still is, a heavy drug user, and at the time, she constantly had people over, or was taking me to other people's houses or apartments that I didn't know. I was about 7, and to this day, I still don't know if what I saw was a real person or not. My mom was, and still is, a heavy drug user, and back then, she constantly had people over or took me to houses and apartments of people I didn't know. One night, I was asleep on the couch. It was really late, and I think my mom was either asleep or gone, because I didn't hear her walking around or talking. I woke up to a man standing over me, just looking at me for what felt like 5 minutes. I pretended to be asleep in case he was an actual person, and I'd get in trouble for being awake. But I kept peeking, and he didn't move or go away. He just stood there. Eventually, I opened my eyes fully, and he still didn't move. Only when I closed my eyes again and tried to hide under the blankets, because I was freaked out, did he seem to disappear. When I looked again, he was gone. It was dark, so all I could really see was a silhouette, but I honestly think it was a man standing over me. I had that unmistakable feeling you get when someone is close, that awareness in your body that you're not alone. There was also a distinct smell that was only there when he was standing over me, which makes me believe even more that he was an actual person. It even looked like he was wearing a jacket. But seriously, who was that and why? Why would someone stand there staring at a sleeping kid in the dark for 5 minutes straight? Story 4. I have a distinct memory of standing on the street I used to live on, the side opposite my house. It was the late 80s, back when the old sodium streetlights were still everywhere in the UK, so everything was washed in that yellow glow. I remember feeling cold. There was an ambulance parked on the opposite side of the road, only a few feet from me. The memory feels almost like a frozen, living picture. A typical old 2-up, 2-down terraced house with a kitchen tacked on at the back. A narrow street that was always a nightmare to park on. The neighbor's front window had a bit of light peeking through the curtains. All I remember is staring at the ambulance, then at our front door, then back at the ambulance again. I kept repeating that for what felt like forever. I remember feeling an urge to move, but I didn't know where to go. I was definitely too young to be standing out there alone, maybe 7 at most. And it was very dark. When I was a kid, I had terrible asthma. It wasn't under control at all until I was in my mid-teens. There were times when I was taken to the hospital in really bad shape. I can't help but wonder if during one of those episodes, I was further gone than anyone ever told me. And then there's the other memory. When I was about 13, I rolled over in bed one night and saw my nan kneeling beside me, praying. She had died a week before. Story 5. We lived in my grandparents' house after they passed. They had a nanny who cared for my mom and her sisters and lived with them her entire life. She was part of the family. The family wasn't rich, but they were well off enough to support her, especially because she had come to them under really difficult personal circumstances. For context, this was just a normal-sized house in a regular suburban neighborhood, not some creepy mansion on a hill. Flash forward to when my mom, my brother, and I were living there. One day, as my mom was getting ready to go out to some event, we took a picture of her in front of the house. Her nanny had passed away many years earlier, but when the photos were developed, she was sitting in the window of what had been her room. That was my bedroom growing up, and it definitely would have freaked me out. except she had been such a kind, wonderful woman. Still, it's the creepiest thing I've ever experienced. Story 6. When I was about 9, I found a cute little colorful bead bracelet, and I got very attached to it. I wore it everywhere. But after a while, subtle, weird things started happening around me. The printer in the basement would start printing blank sheets of paper as I sat next to it, even though no one had touched it in weeks. It visibly freaked my mom out, but she told me it was just a glitch, so I wouldn't be scared. I had night terrors growing up, but they were especially bad during this time. I would see shadows in my room before I was even sleepy enough to start drifting off. I'd run to my mom's room and tell her, but she would reassure me again that it was just a nightmare. Another night, things got next level creepy. I was asleep with the bracelet on, my arm hanging off the side of the bed. I started feeling the bracelet move on my arm. I jolted a little, thinking it was just shifting because of how my arm was hanging, until it started moving up and down my arm, slowly, almost like something was caressing it. I jumped out of bed, ripped the bracelet off, and ran screaming to my mom. I was so hysterical that I could barely get the words out. She didn't say much this time, probably because she couldn't understand what I was sputtering. So she just consoled me and let me sleep in her bed. The next day, my big sister, who was 19 at the time, came to visit. I told both her and my mom about what had happened the night before. And when I showed them the bracelet, my sister went pale. It turned out that my mother's father, who was a very bad, perverted man, had given that bracelet to my sister when she was young. He had died only a couple of months before all of this happened. My mom grabbed the bracelet as fast as she could and threw it out into the street immediately. Story 7. From the ages of 3 to 7, I was terrified of the hallway outside my bedroom door. I have 2 memories from that time that still scare me. Story 1. I was about 5 and already terrified of the hallway, so I ran from one side of it to the other. But when I reached the other side, I ended up on the ground crying. My mother heard me and came over. "They chased me," I said. "Who?" she asked. "The man. He chased me." "There's no one here. Nobody chased you," she insisted. But I saw him, and he chased me, and he whispered in my ear to run. Things like that kept happening until we moved out. I was terrified of that hallway because I always thought I heard whispering in the walls. Story 2. One night, I left my door open because I was scared, and I decided to sleep on the floor, something I did often. It was probably around 6 in the morning when I saw my dad leave the house wearing the same pajama, pants he always wore, and a black t-shirt. A moment later, both my mother and father ran into my room and began questioning me. At the time, I thought they were mad that I was awake. My dad asked me who had just left the house. I told him it was him. They kept asking me to remember more, but I only remember the man looking exactly like my dad, wearing his clothing. Story 8. This reminds me of when I was at my Nana's, and I got stuck in the in-between for a moment. This memory sticks with me all the time, and I must have been about 5. I remember talking to my friend Spencer, wondering where all the adults had gone. I hopped off the couch and walked to the kitchen, certain that's where they would be. At my Nana's house, the layout was the living room, then the playroom, and then the door to the kitchen. I remember walking to that door and pressing my ear against it, but I didn't hear anything. I turned around to report my findings to my friend Spencer. And that's when I realized everything around me had stopped. All motion had frozen except for me. It was eerily quiet, even though Spencer and I had been watching cartoons on the TV. What really made me start to panic was that Spencer looked a million years away, blurry and distant, even though he was only a few feet from me. He was frozen mid-laugh. Everything in the living room was frozen in place. I walked back to the kitchen door and found it locked. The living room wasn't far from the playroom. They were separated by two walls with no middle, almost like each wall had a little drive-through window opening in it. Even as I type this, I can still remember the sense of wrongness that whole situation had, even when I was only 5. After trying the kitchen door, I remember trying to run into the living room, but for a moment, I couldn't reach it. It was like the space kept stretching, and I remember worrying I was going to be stuck there. Strange, right? Then I blinked, and suddenly everything was back to normal. The TV was moving again. Spencer was laughing like nothing had happened, and the world felt right. I tried telling Spencer, my Nana, and my Poppy, but no one believed me. Or maybe the adults did. They just didn't want to admit it. That house was haunted anyway, especially the basement, where one of Nana's daughters lived. Story 9. I remember that when I was about 12 and onward, I would randomly wake up in the middle of the night to my abusive mother standing in the doorway. She had this look she gave when she was especially messed up from mixing alcohol and sleeping pills. It was absolutely satanic. More than once, I woke to her just staring at me, far longer than anyone would if they were simply checking in. She would stand there for what felt like forever, and if I even moved the slightest bit, she would scream at me for being awake and punish me. One day, my dad called me out to the living room, and my mother was there, looking unusually concerned, telling him he was taking things too far. He looked at me and said, "Your mom says you've been lying in bed crying at night because you're afraid someone is going to come into your room and kill you. What's that about?" I was completely confused and brushed it off as one of my mother's drunk or high delusions, telling him that no, I absolutely did not. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized my mother often projected onto other people. For years, she insisted she suspected my dad was cheating on her, and it turned out she was the one cheating on him. Looking back, she was probably getting completely messed up and having thoughts she shifted onto me. No, we do not talk anymore, and I have made it very clear that she is not welcome on my property and that I will take the necessary steps to protect my boundaries if she ever decides to show up. Story 10. When I was about 14, I was home alone while my parents were out visiting friends. Around 9:30 at night, I suddenly heard voices downstairs. I knew all the doors were locked and no one besides my parents could get in, so I was afraid someone had broken into the house. I stopped and listened. It sounded like at least a dozen people having some kind of dinner party, though I couldn't make out exactly what they were saying. I made it halfway down the stairs, and the voices were still going, a steady murmur of people talking. Finally, I yelled, "Hello," and every voice stopped instantly. I didn't hear another sound. It's the craziest thing I've ever experienced. Story 11. When I was either 5 or 6, my mom took me to stay the night at one of her friends' houses. I specifically remember watching Batman, the animated series, when I got there, the episode where Two-Face appears for the first time. I don't remember much else about the day, just that it was a big, redneck kind of family she left me with, and I was put to bed pretty early in a room with their 3-year-old son. He woke up in the middle of the night and said he wanted to go to his parents' room. I didn't want to be alone, so I followed him. By the time I got to the doorway, he was already crawling into their bed, but the floor of their room was covered in junk, and I couldn't take even 2 steps without making a bunch of noise. The father told me to go back to the room, so I reluctantly turned around to do that. I had to go to the bathroom, which was down the hall, past the living room, and past the kitchen at the very end of the house. I got to the end of the hallway before noticing something moving in the living room. I ducked behind the open closet door at the end of the hall. That's when I realized the front door was open. There was a black, hooded figure floating in the living room. I could see its face and hands, both gray, but it had a light blue aura surrounding its whole body and cloak. Its eyes and mouth were just glowing blue slits. It moved from outside, through the front door and into the kitchen, where I lost sight of it behind the wall that separated the kitchen from the living room. It kept going back and forth, outside and into the kitchen, incredibly fast. It sounds silly now, but one of the last times I saw it zip past, it was carrying a box of Lucky Charms from the kitchen. It went out the door with the box and then back into the kitchen with it once or twice. It left the box in the kitchen, apparently, then went back and forth a few more times. I must have made a sound because it suddenly stopped in the middle of the room and started looking around. I couldn't move. I was completely terrified. It looked straight at me, and all of that blue light flashed bright red for a moment before turning blue again. Then it began drifting toward me. It could have rushed me, given how fast I'd seen it move, but instead it came toward me slowly. I ran back to the bedroom, shut the door, and I think I fell asleep leaning against it, crying. The next morning, I told the mother of the family what had happened. She told me it was just a nightmare. But then I remember the oldest son arguing with her about where the Lucky Charms had gone. They found the box under the kitchen table, and I remember the two of them arguing about who had used it last. Story 12. When I was about 11, a new guy moved in next door. He owned a utilities company, so he always had employees over, and they often got drunk after work and crashed at his place. One night, I decided to sneak out to hang out with a friend. I got home around 1 a.m. and realized I had forgotten my key, so I planned to wait on the patio until my dad got up for work and unlocked the back door. I was on my phone to pass the time, and it was obvious I was an 11-year-old girl curled up next to the lawn chairs. But I wasn't too scared because we lived in a nice neighborhood. I heard some weird noises, but I brushed them off as squirrels. Later, though, I heard my metal fence shaking like someone was climbing over it, heavy boots stomping around in the backyard, loud breathing near me, and a tall shadow moving behind the screened-off parts of the patio. Fight or flight kicked in, and I decided I'd rather get grounded than kidnapped. I started screaming bloody murder and banging on the back door, begging my dad to let me in. Whoever was in the yard heard me, bolted, and hid along the side of the house before running off. I never saw any of the man's employees hanging out there after that night, and about 2 weeks later, he moved away. Story 13. I was a freshman in high school. My friends from work lived about a mile away, and I would sometimes walk home from their house late at night. It was a well-lit residential area, homes and fences on the left, and across the street, a creek that ran along the right. One night, I was walking home around 2 a.m. I saw a van pulled up in the distance, maybe 60 feet, ahead, dropping a bunch of things along the sidewalk before pulling away down the street. I tightened my hoodie and approached slowly, only to find an inordinate amount of children's shoes scattered along the sidewalk. Probably 6 or 7 pairs of used kids' shoes, just dumped there at night with not another person in sight. I freaked out and ran home as fast as I could. I never heard anything about it in the news or online. I still can't make sense of it, and the memory still haunts me. Story 14. For a little context, in elementary school, I had a friend whose mom worked as a paraprofessional at our school. My own parents worked late, so instead of taking the bus home and being alone in the house for 3 or so hours, I usually stayed after school with my friend until his mom finished grading papers. Then we would go to their house and hang out until my mom could pick me up. We always played Army in his backyard, which backed up to a forest about a mile across. On the other side of the woods was another neighborhood. For some reason, whenever we played Army, my friend always told me that a railroad used to run diagonally through that stretch of forest. This was over 15 years ago, so I forget exactly how he said he knew that, but it always struck me as strange. I had lived next to an active railroad my whole life, and there was always a ton of scrap metal and wood scattered around real tracks. But in those woods, there was nothing. No tracks, no railroad spikes, no planks, nothing that would make you think, oh, this used to be a train line. Fast forward a couple of months. During our regular play sessions, we started hearing whistling deep in the woods, almost like someone was whistling right into our ears, even though we were far enough in that we couldn't see his house or the neighborhood on the other side. I distinctly remember feeling like I was being watched, but for some reason, it didn't absolutely terrify me. It felt more like a playful kind of fear. I'd grown up in a devout Christian household and was always told that ghosts and things like that weren't real, so I was confident nothing truly scary would happen. I assumed there had to be some logical explanation for the whistling, the feeling of being watched, all of it. Honestly, it added to the excitement for me and my friend as we explored those creepy woods. That all changed when, along with the unexplained whistling, we started finding charred objects buried under the layers of muddy maple and oak leaves. Teddy bears, bits of clothing, toys. Okay, teenagers were probably messing around back there, burning things out of boredom. But still, it added another layer to the mystery and to the excitement. So, my friend and I decided that the next Friday night, we'd have a sleepover and explore the woods at night to look for ghosts. Smart idea, right? The day came, and I packed flashlights and batteries in my book bag. The night before, I had made sure to replace every flashlight's batteries with brand new, fresh out of the pack Duracells. My mom had bought a huge pack from Costco or something, and I even packed extra because I was paranoid. So I went to school, stayed after with my friend and his mom, and then went back to their house to wait for dark. When the sun finally went down and the sky turned that grayish blue right before full night, we headed into the woods with about 5 flashlights, all of them mine, since his family only owned one, and mine had about 10 because we went camping a lot. We went in, flashlights blazing, and as soon as we got far enough from the house that the back porch floodlight couldn't reach us, we started to hear the whistling, soft but still clear. It was exactly like someone was whistling right into my ear. But courageous as boys are when neither wants to be the one who chickens out, we kept moving deeper until the back porch light was nothing more than a distant speck. Beyond the reach of our flashlights, it was pitch black. That was when we started hearing rustling around us. Nothing violent, nothing that made it clear we were in danger. We were in the woods after all. It could have been a squirrel, a deer, a rabbit. All totally normal for the area. What really started to freak us out was when both of our freshly re-batteried flashlights began to flicker. At that point we were scared, but it still wasn't completely supernatural. The flashlights were old and cheap, and I had 3 more stuffed in my pockets. So I gave him a new one and grabbed one for myself, and we kept going. It didn't take more than another 3 minutes for those flashlights to start flickering again, followed by a far more violent rustling that seemed to surround us, and then the whistling. The same goddamn whistling. We didn't even have to think. Run! We both said it at the exact same time, like we were reading each other's minds, and sprinted back toward the porch light. We reached it in about 5 minutes. And for some reason, convinced we were just being chickens and letting our minds mess with us, we decided we should go back. So my friend went inside to grab the single flashlight his family owned, a big old sheriff-style flashlight, while I waited on the porch, standing in the glow of the floodlight that lit up the backyard, all the way to the tree line. Or at least I thought I was safe, while my friend was inside looking for the flashlight. And I know plenty of people will call nonsense on this, just like my friend did. I saw a white, translucent figure float across the tree line and disappear into the dark. I ran inside and called my mom to come get me, telling my friend what I saw and why I was leaving, even though he didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either, but I remember it as clearly as if it happened yesterday. How could I forget? Fast forward to high school. I was sitting in class on my school-issued computer, fooling around on Google Earth since every gaming website was blocked by the administration. I zoomed over my old friend's neighborhood, and there it was. A little I information marker sitting right in the middle of the woods where all of this had happened. It marked the location of an old railroad, one of the first in my state, built sometime in the 1800s. How he knew about it, I still have no idea. Google Earth wasn't a thing back then, or at least I'd never heard of it. And every time I think about that marker, I can't help but think of a steam locomotive's whistle when I remember the sound we heard out there. Anyway, that's my story. Story 15. I'll try to keep it short since I was young and not the best storyteller back then. I couldn't say exactly how old I was, maybe between 8 and 10. I was in Mexico with my parents for my grandmother's funeral. The funeral was held at her house, the one she owned in the poor town where she grew up. The house across the street was where we were going to spend the night. The street wasn't really a street, more like a dirt road barely wide enough for a car and a half to pass in either direction. The house we stayed in was 2 stories tall with a spiral staircase. It was pretty dark inside too, because there weren't light bulbs every few feet the way there are in homes today. There was another boy there who I didn't know. He was with another family who was also visiting. He and I were taken to the house to sleep because it was late. For some reason, I remember the houses downstairs really well, even though I don't remember much about the upstairs. Picture this. You walk through the open front door, and the first thing you see a few feet in front of you is the back of a couch. If someone were sitting there, you'd see the back of their head. In front of that couch was another couch facing the door, so you'd see someone's face if they were sitting there. Behind the 2 couches was a small hallway. In other words, front door, couch, couch, hallway. Hope that helps you visualize it. The staircase was to the right of the couches, sort of next to them, but not quite, just a few feet to the right when you walked in through the front door. Fast forward, who knows how long. It was just the other kid and me asleep in the house, because all the adults were still across the street at the viewing or wherever. I remember being woken up, the kind of waking where you don't know where you are or what's going on. Someone was saying, "Let's go," and pulling my arm, dragging me out of bed and pretty much down the stairs. But as I was going down those spiral stairs, I remember looking over and seeing the other kid, the boy who should have been asleep upstairs with me, sitting on the couch facing the hallway. He was just sitting there in the dark, staring into the dark hallway with a blank expression. When we got outside, there were a few adults who clearly did not want to go into the house. They were standing at the doorway, calling his name, sounding panicked. I remember some light crying from the grown-ups who were scared. There was no response from him at all. No movement, no acknowledgement, nothing. Just that blank stare into the hallway. I never asked as an adult what actually happened that night. I still don't know to this day. Maybe it wasn't as creepy as it seems now, or maybe the not knowing all these years is exactly what makes it so unsettling to me personally. Story 16. I've always had night terrors, still do, even into my 30s. But one dream or experience in particular has stayed with me. I was about 15 or 16, asleep at my family's cottage property in a room with my friend, my sister, and her friend, each of us in separate beds. I remember the dream vividly. I was inside a prison, wearing a wedding dress, sitting in a hot tub with a group of inmates. The water bubbled green, like a witch's cauldron. Each inmate was telling stories about what they were in prison for. One man told me he was there for killing his own son and burying him in the flower beds at his house. He said he could never sleep because every time he woke up, he would see his little blonde boy, dirt on his face, wearing a striped shirt with glowing red eyes, peering at him from around the corner of the door. At that point, I woke up, or at least it felt like I did, and I looked toward the door. Standing there was the same little blonde boy from the dream, dirty-faced, wearing a striped shirt, staring at me from around the doorframe with glowing red eyes. I screamed, and then I actually woke up for real, which of course woke up everyone else in the room. I couldn't believe it, because up until then, my night terrors were always hard to remember, and mostly just shadowy shapes. Nothing this clear. But that boy has followed me ever since, even though it has probably been a good 5 years since I last saw him or dreamed about him. I still remember so clearly and distinctly that moment of waking up and seeing him. And that intensely messed up dream too, especially the way the hot tub water was green and bubbling like a cartoon witch's cauldron. I don't remember much of my other night terrors, though I use a recording app that often picks up my voice asking something, or someone, "What are you?" or telling them to stop it, or stop laughing at me. But I haven't been visited by that little red-eyed boy in years, and I hope it stays that way. Story 17. A group of friends and I were on our way to a music festival and took a wrong turn, which led us into a countryside-ish residential area. We drove through a few neighborhoods and even past a graveyard before realizing there was no way we were going in the right direction. So we turned around. In our defense, it was dark, so it wasn't exactly easy to tell. On our way back along the same road, it suddenly got foggy, and we were all freaked out as we drove past the cemetery again. For whatever reason, when you're lost, you turn the music down and roll the windows down. So we did. Just as we passed the cemetery on our right, we heard a girl yell, "Help," from the trees on our left. My friend immediately floored it, thinking it was a ghost. We all looked left, and there was an actual girl in a dress running out of the woods. We slowed down, but we didn't know what to do because we were afraid it might be a trap. A car behind us stopped, so we kept going. When we finally found our way to the festival, we told a cop who was directing traffic, but he didn't seem to care. We were in high school and terrified, but I really wish we had called 911. Story 18. I used to holiday in the Scottish Highlands. Friends of the family had a cottage there in the middle of nowhere, and the isolation always made it feel a bit creepy. One day, I went outside and heard the most unearthly sound I had ever experienced. It sounded like a robot demon cackling wildly while crying in agony at the same time. It just sounded wrong. I went back inside, white as a sheet, and told my dad. He grabbed a stick, said, "Come on," and set off to find the source. We homed in on the noise and discovered it was coming from the area near the water tank, which filled from the stream and supplied the cottage. There was clearly something not from this world trapped inside the tank. We approached and circled the tank nervously. Suddenly, my dad said, "Ah!" and strode confidently toward it. I still don't fully understand the water system, but there was a small vent pipe on the tank. A large leaf had gotten stuck in the pipe and created a kind of reed, like a woodwind instrument, and the tank was acting as a giant amplifier and reverb chamber. The sound had been channeled down the valley where the stream ran and straight toward the cottage. I can still hear it in my head as I type this. Absolutely demonic. And I still want to know how my dad thought he was going to take on a slobbering hell beast with a 3-foot stick. Story 19. I do not remember exactly how young I was, but I know I was very young. At the time, both of my parents worked full-time, and my very old grandmother lived with us and took care of me during the day. I was an only child then, and we lived in flats. During the day, my grandmother would take long baths while I sat in front of the TV until she came out to play with me. One day, she took much longer than usual. After calling out to her and getting no response, I went to the bathroom door and knocked. When she still didn't answer, I went inside. She was submerged up to her chin. Her body was twisted, and her face was so contorted it looked like she was in agony. Her lips were pulled sharply to one side, and her eyes were, I don't know, just blank. I do not remember what happened next, but whenever my parents retold the story, they said I ran out of the flat screaming bloody murder. Neighbors heard, called an ambulance, and contacted my parents. She had suffered a stroke and would be bedridden for the rest of her life. She died a year or so later, I think. It's strange. I can no longer remember what she looked like in general, but I can still see her face from that moment. My parents told me I did not speak for weeks afterward. Story 20. When I was 10 years old, a new family moved in nearby. They had set up a shrine with a face on a tree and candles in their backyard. Irrelevant, except that it added to the general creepiness. We became friends with the girl in the family, and she began telling us that her house was haunted. We were intrigued, as any good 10-year-olds would be. But given how odd the family seemed, we did not think much of it. One day, while we were playing in the yard with her, a disheveled man suddenly came running out of the front door, followed closely by the family. He sprinted full speed into the woods, with the dad shouting after him. We later learned that the man had been living in their attic and had been keeping it locked from the inside. When the dad finally pried it open, the man bolted, leading to the chase we witnessed. To this day, I check under, inside, above, behind, and outside every place I have ever lived, and I regularly clear corners when I get home. It was creepy as anything. Story 21. I've lived in a small mountain town in Colorado for 17 years. When my friends and I got our licenses, we'd drive around in the mountains whenever we got bored. There was one area we went to often, beautiful, but known to be sketchy. People would shoot guns in unsafe spots. There was a lot of drug use during parties, and bodies had occasionally been found back there. One night we were driving around when we suddenly passed a man walking on the road. It was strange because we hadn't seen him in the headlights at all. It was more like he appeared out of nowhere right as we were passing him. I thought he was walking a little strangely as I looked back at him, so I asked my friend to stop. Maybe he was hurt or something. He paused for about 10 seconds after we stopped, and then he suddenly started running toward the vehicle. It wasn't a "let me catch up real quick" jog, or a wave to get our attention. It was a full-on sprint, like he had a personal vendetta against us. It scared us, and my friend hit the gas again. We did call the police afterward, just to make sure we hadn't left someone in danger, but we never heard anything else about it. This one is more lighthearted, but when Until Dawn first came out, I was living alone for the first time at 22. I was absolutely petrified of the dark for weeks after watching the playthrough. I had to start sleeping with a light on because I was having nightmares, and I was genuinely terrified that the monsters from the game might somehow bust in through my sliding door windows. I could not even bring myself to move around in bed to get comfortable. I knew it was ridiculous, but I just could not shake that fear for weeks. Story 22. I was walking with my grandmother at night along a gravel road near her home out in the country. We were heading back to my grandparents' house. 6-year-old me turned to my grandmother and asked who the lady was, who had just run across the road behind us. She turned around, saw no one, and asked me to describe her. I described perfectly a cruel woman who had lived not far away and had been dead for 10 years. I didn't live there, so I didn't think much of it. But according to my grandfather, my description of the woman was so accurate that my grandmother never walked alone there after dark again. That was 29 years ago, and she still refuses to walk that road by herself at night. Story 23. Growing up, I looked a little older than I was, but it did not really change anything. I was around 10, though I probably looked about 11 or 12. At the time, I usually walked an old lady's dog, a small pug, around the block. She was very kind and paid me £1 for it. One day, I decided to go to my local shop, which was only a 5-minute walk from my house. While I was looking at the sweets, a man came in and started talking to me. It was a long time ago, so I do not remember the whole conversation, but I remember the unsettling parts. He offered to buy me sweets and a few fizzy drinks, and being the gluttonous 10-year-old I was, I accepted. He spent around 20 pounds on sweets alone. He somehow knew I had a much younger sister and asked if she liked bonbons. I told him I didn't know, but that she probably couldn't eat them yet. When we got to the drinks, he asked, "What school do you go to?" Keep in mind, I was 10, alone in the shop, and I didn't know this man at all. I pretended I didn't know, but then he said the name of my school himself. "You go to school, right?" My heart dropped for a moment because I had never seen this man before in my life. I stupidly, probably putting other kids in danger if he had bad intentions, told him I went to a school down the hill from my actual one. He then asked where I lived, and that was when things started to click for me. If my parents knew this man and he lived in the area, he would probably already know where I stayed. So why was he asking? I told him I lived next to the train station, which was the opposite direction, and he replied with something that scared me even more. "I've seen you walking from my street." As a 10-year-old, I was terrified, not just because he had spent 20 pounds on sweets alone. The drinks, sweets, and crisps came to almost 30 altogether, but because he kept asking me questions when he clearly already knew the answers. I nervously laughed, and once he paid, he asked if I wanted him to walk me home since it was late. It was midsummer, sometime between 7 and 9 in the evening, still perfectly light outside. I declined and told him my dad was waiting for me. I walked down a street that led toward the train station, but also turned toward my actual street. Friends and other people who knew me lived nearby, so I felt a little safer. He still walked with me to the start of the street, but before the turn, I told him my dad was waiting for me in his car at the end. I ran home and never mentioned it to my mom. She did ask where I got all the stuff, and I lied and said I had found money. I never saw him again, ever, so I doubt he even lived near me. It might not be the creepiest thing in the world, but it was definitely creepy enough for me to still wonder what on earth he was doing. Story 24. My dad and I was probably 8 at the time, too big for a booster seat, but too small for the front, so I was still in the back. We're driving home from something. It was a divided highway with 2 lanes in each direction, and there were a lot of tractor trailers on the road. My dad went to pass one, but we ended up getting boxed in, and it wasn't a slow truck trying to pass another slowly. It went on long enough that it was clearly on purpose. So there we were, one truck deliberately going slow in front of us, another blocking the lane beside us, and the open side was nothing but solid rock as they tried to push us off the road. I remember my dad being completely freaked out, trying to get the license plates of the trucks so he could report them to the police, though he couldn't call at that moment because we were in a cell phone dead zone. I looked up from the book I was reading and made eye contact with one of the drivers. He had a big white beard and looked straight at me with a sinister smile that, had I still believed in Santa Claus, would have made me terrified of Christmas. Eventually, we reached a town and pulled into a parking lot where my dad called the police. We waited about 10 minutes to put some distance between us and the trucks, then got back on the road and, thankfully, never crossed paths with them again. Story 25. 2 stories from the same place we used to holiday every year. A tiny island, half a mile wide and a mile across. No cars were allowed, and it had once been inhabited by monks, so there were plenty of ghost stories. The first happened when we were staying at the campsite. I had gone to the toilets and was walking back to our tent. I passed through a small group of people sitting in chairs in the middle of the field. That wasn't unusual. People often sat out stargazing and drinking without disturbing anyone in their tents. As I passed through, someone said something to get my attention. I can't remember what it was, but I started chatting with them. Suddenly, one man pointed his finger at me. He had a cigarette in his hand, and all at once the only thing I could focus on was the lit end of it. He kept talking, but I have no idea what he was saying. I just could not take my eyes off that glowing orange dot. I felt very afraid, but I could not move. It was like the whole world vanished, and it was just me, him, and that cigarette I couldn't stop staring at. I don't know what actually happened, but I am absolutely sure that man hypnotized me in an instant. I remember hearing someone in the group laugh, and it was like the spell snapped. I bolted back to my tent with my heart pounding while they all laughed at me. It's still one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me. I don't really believe in psychics or hypnotism, but that guy definitely did something to my brain. The other incident happened when we stayed in a cottage overlooking a courtyard with a church in the corner. It was the last thing I saw outside when I closed the curtains at night, and it always freaked me out. It got to the point where I would crawl under the window so I could close the curtains without having to look out at that creepy old church. A few years later, some archaeologists visited the island and did some digging. What did they find under the church steps? The skeleton of a monk, buried upside down. Story 26. When I was a little girl, probably around 8 or 9 years old, I used to rollerblade around our house. I always told my parents to count, and when I finished, they'd tell me how fast I was. Our house was really a long apartment building. I'd guess about 100 meters, so skating around it meant I had to go a couple of 100 meters each lap. I always found the backside of the building kind of creepy when it was dark. The road ran between the apartments and a church, and the light from the apartments didn't reach that area. There were only a few streetlights to light the way. This particular day was sometime in the fall. I remember because it was the afternoon, but it was already dark by the time I went out to skate around the house. I turned the corner and came to the back side of the building. The street was empty except for someone on a bicycle farther up the road. I could tell it was a bike at first, only because of the light. He was heading toward me in the opposite direction. Right before we passed each other, I saw that it was a man, and he was staring at me. Not just glancing, intensely staring. As he rode by, he even turned his head to keep watching me. A few seconds after we passed, I looked back over my shoulder, and he was still staring, his head now turned completely the opposite way from the direction he was riding. It scared me, so I tried to go faster. A few seconds later, I looked back again, just once more. This time, I saw him making a U-turn and coming back my way. He was going pretty fast too, fast enough that he cut off the road onto the grass before turning back onto the street, now heading straight toward me. Like I said, it was, pretty dark, and I will never forget the sight of that headlight swinging around and pointing in my direction. I completely freaked out and skated as fast as I could around the building, never looking back again because I was too scared to check. I kept thinking I didn't want him to know where I lived, so instead of going straight home, I took a smaller path between some buildings and hid there for a while until I finally worked up the courage to go back. When I got back, my parents were outside and wondered why I had taken so long. I told them what had happened, but I don't remember what they said about it. Maybe it was nothing, but there was something truly unsettling about the way he was staring at me. I will definitely never forget how scared I was, seeing that headlight swing around and turn back toward me. Story 27. A stranger once tried to get me into his car on my walk home from school. He offered me candy and everything. He kept saying, "Oh, come on, you look tired. It's a hot day. I'll give you a ride home. Where are you going?" I started yelling "stranger danger" and ran. I knew there was a crossing guard at the end of the street. By the time I reached her, I was screaming and crying, and she immediately took my hand and started knocking on doors to call the police. This was before cell phones. Apparently, the man had whipped a U-turn and sped away the moment I started screaming, which is how the crossing guard already knew something was wrong. The police walked me home. My parents were pretty freaked out, but the police said that because of how loudly I reacted, chances were high that this predator wouldn't come back. The whole thing must have been so traumatic that I didn't remember it until I was about 26. Looking back, I realize how terrified I was, and thinking now about how close I came to something horrible happening makes me sick. Story 28. Years ago, I went on a family trip with my mother's brother, my uncle, my aunt, and 4 cousins to Niagara Falls. There were 2 beds in the hotel room. My aunt and uncle slept in one, and all of us kids shared the other. Somehow, I ended up on the side of the bed that faced their bed. I kept hearing a soft whistle, phew phew, followed by my uncle saying, "Look at the birdie." I finally opened my eyes and saw him looking at me with a creepy smile, gesturing for me to look down at the birdie. I had no idea what he meant at first. Then I saw what he was holding. I immediately shut my eyes as tight as I could. I heard him laugh. I was terrified and just waited for one of the other kids to wake up and save me. It was the scariest moment of my childhood, and I never told anyone because I felt ashamed for falling for his trick, ashamed that I had seen that, confused about why he would do that to me, disgusted by what I saw, and scared I would somehow get in trouble. I just wanted to unsee it. Instead, I pretended it never happened. Creepy as anything. Story 29. This might not be too creepy, but it's the creepiest memory I have. I was around 5 or 7 at the time. I can't remember exactly. There was a New Year's party at my house. To give you the picture, my house doesn't have a backyard, but it does have a pretty large front yard where we park our cars and where a mango tree stands. On the right side of the house, there was a narrow space between the wall separating my neighbor's house and ours. That area was about 5 to 6 meters wide. As the party went on, more and more people showed up. Most of them people I didn't even know. One of the groups that showed up was made up of people in their early 30s. I was playing a gunfighting game with my cousins, and I decided to run into that narrow space I mentioned. While I was there, I noticed that one of the guys from that group had also wandered in. He was pretty chubby, holding a bottle of beer and smelling strongly of alcohol, something I only recognized years later. He just stood there, smiling. I couldn't tell if he was smiling at me or just smiling in general, but he was smiling. I didn't think much of him at first and tried to leave the narrow space. I was just about to walk out when he started laughing and doing this slow, exaggerated kind of walk. The kind you see in cartoons when a character is sneaking up on someone. He crept closer and closer. I was a paranoid kid back then, so I decided to get out of there. He followed me, still smiling, still holding the beer bottle in his hand. Eventually, I made it back to the front yard where everyone else was. I never saw that guy again, and I still have no idea who he was. Story 30. When I was younger, I was a scout. It was a mixed group of boys and girls, and my small group decided to go camping on an island that was connected to the mainland by a narrow strip of land. It was a popular spot in the summer, so camping there wasn't allowed since it was private property. But the adult who was going with us knew one of the owners. He was a nice guy and let us stay for one night. We got there just as most people were leaving. We set up our hammocks, got everything sorted, made dinner, and lit a fire. In our group, there were both younger kids, 9 and 10 years old, and us, older ones, around 11 to 14. We older kids decided to head to the beach on the other side of the island to listen to music without waking the younger ones. So we went, and before we knew it, it was around 3 in the morning. At one point, someone locked 2 others inside one of the outdoor toilets. They started kicking at the door to get out, and when they finally did, they came out shouting and laughing. Soon all of us were being loud and generally messing around. A short distance away, there was this huge house, like big. Suddenly, one of the windows flew open. A man who looked to be in his 50s started shouting and yelling, at us to shut the hell up and get out of there. Or he'd call the police. Since we were being loud, we apologized and headed back to where we were sleeping. When we got back, we suddenly heard a car starting, so we hurried to get into our tents and hammocks. Then the guy came speeding down the bumpy dirt road in this old car that looked like it had been in a few crashes. He slammed on the brakes and slid sideways to a stop. The man got out of the car, yelling again and shouting all kinds of nasty things about how we kids were jerks and didn't deserve to live, and so on. When our adult leader woke up, the man ran back to his car and returned with a metal baseball bat, like a solid steel one, and started waving it around wildly. He ran closer to our hammocks and even kicked one of the tents. Our leader finally stood up and threatened to call the police, and the guy eventually left. We decided not to call the police since it was late and we figured he might have family who had nothing to do with what happened. The creepy part. The next day, when we tried to figure out who lived in that huge house, we found out that no one had lived there for at least 5 years. The last owner had died. There could be a completely normal explanation for it, but I was about 11 at the time, and it scared the hell out of me. I still go there every summer, but I definitely avoid that house. Story 31. When I was 8, I lived in a condo in Florida with my mom and dad. The condos were set up so there was a bottom unit and a top unit, and my best friend at the time happened to live in the condo above us. We spent a lot of time riding our bikes around the building without adult supervision. It was normal for us and usually felt safe. One day we were out riding when we noticed an older man sitting in a chair on his porch with a rolled up newspaper. It definitely looked like something was inside it. As soon as he saw us, he started following us around, and the newspaper stayed rolled up under his arm the entire time. My friend and I got freaked out and rode home as fast as we could. Luckily, my dad was home, so we didn't have to worry about the man trying to get into the house. I still have no idea what he had rolled up in that newspaper, but the memory still creeps me out to this day. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.